Maya Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she pushed the heavy cleaning cart down the long hospital corridor. It was another 12-hour shift, and her feet were already aching in her worn-out shoes. She had been working at St. Mary's Hospital for almost 8 years now, ever since her husband Diego had his accident at the construction site. The doctors said he would never walk properly again, and the medical bills kept piling up like snow in winter. Every day was the same. Routine. Wake up at 5 in the morning, get her 2 kids ready for school, drop them off, and then head straight to work. She cleaned rooms, mopped floors, emptied trash cans, and scrubbed bathrooms until her hands were raw. The work was hard, but it paid the bills, and Maya was grateful to have a job at all. But there was something different about today. As Maya wheeled her cart past the old chapel wing, she heard something that made her stop dead in her tracks. It was music. Beautiful, flowing, music that seemed to dance through the air like magic. She had heard piano music before on the radio, but this was different. This was real, happening right there in the hospital. Maya followed the sound, her curiosity getting the better of her. The chapel wing had been closed for renovations for months, but somehow the music was coming from there. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The room was dusty and filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, but there in the corner sat an old piano. The music had stopped, and the room was empty. She walked closer to the piano, her heart beating faster with each step. The instrument looked ancient, with scratches on its dark wood surface and keys that had turned slightly yellow with age. Maya had never seen a real piano up close before. In her small apartment, the only music came from an old radio that barely worked. Without really thinking about it, Maya reached out and touched one of the keys. A single note rang out, clear and beautiful. She jumped back, startled by the sound she had created. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, she pressed another key, then another. Each note seemed to tell a story, and Maya felt something stirring inside her chest that she had never felt before. For the next few minutes, Maya stood there pressing random keys, listening to the different sounds they made. Some were high and light, like birds singing in the morning. Others were deep and rich, like her grandfather's voice when he used to tell her stories as a child. She didn't know what she was doing, but something about the piano felt right, like coming home after a long journey. From that day forward, Maya found herself taking a different route during her lunch breaks. Instead of eating in the noisy cafeteria with the other staff, she would slip away to the old chapel. She would stand next to the piano, sometimes just looking at it, sometimes pressing a few keys when she was sure no one could hear. Maya started bringing her lunch to the chapel, eating her sandwich while staring at the piano. She wondered what it would be like to actually play a real song, to make the kind of beautiful music she sometimes heard on the radio. But the thought seemed impossible. She was 34 years old, with rough hands from years of cleaning work and no money for music lessons. People like her didn't play piano. That was for rich kids whose parents could afford fancy teachers and expensive instruments. But the piano seemed to call to her anyway. During her breaks, Maya would run her fingers along the keys without pressing them, feeling the smooth surface and imagining what it would be like to know how to make real music. She started humming little tunes while she worked, melodies that popped into her head from nowhere. One afternoon, while Maya was cleaning the windows near the chapel, she heard voices coming from inside. 2 nurses were talking and laughing about something. Maya's heart sank as she realized they were talking about her. "Did you see her yesterday?" one of them said. "Standing there touching that old piano like she's some kind of musician." "I know, right?" The other nurse laughed. "Maya thinks she's going to be the next concert pianist or something. At her age, with those hands, it's kind of sad, really." Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed her visits to the chapel. She quickly finished cleaning the windows and hurried away, but their words followed her like shadows. Over the next few days, Maya noticed more people seemed to be watching her. During break time, conversations would stop when she walked by, and she could feel eyes following her movements. Someone had obviously been talking about her piano visits, and the word was spreading through the hospital like wildfire. The teasing started small at first. A few giggles when she passed by, some whispered comments about Maya's musical dreams. But it quickly got worse. People would make jokes about her concert career and ask when she was going to give her first performance. Some of the younger staff members would wiggle their fingers in the air when they saw her, pretending to play an invisible piano. Maya tried to ignore it all, but the comments hurt more than she wanted to admit. She had always been a quiet person, someone who kept to herself and didn't cause trouble. She had never asked for attention or tried to be something she wasn't. But somehow her simple fascination with the piano had made her a target for everyone's amusement. The worst part was that Maya couldn't explain why she felt so drawn to the piano. It wasn't like she had some grand plan to become a famous musician. She just loved the way it sounded, the way it made her feel when she heard those beautiful notes. For a few minutes each day, when she stood next to that old piano, all her worries about money and bills and her husband's medical problems seemed to fade away. But now, every time she thought about visiting the chapel, she heard those nurses laughing in her head. She imagined all the other staff members watching her, waiting to see what the crazy cleaning lady would do next. Maya started eating her lunch in the supply closet instead, hiding among the mops and cleaning supplies where no one could see her. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the piano. At night, when she was lying in bed listening to Diego's labored breathing and her children sleeping in the next room, Maya would close her eyes and imagine sitting at that old piano. She would picture her fingers moving across the keys, creating beautiful music that would make people stop and listen in wonder instead of laughter. Maya knew it was just a dream, probably a foolish one. But for some reason, she couldn't let it go. Every morning when she woke up, the first thing she thought about was that piano waiting in the empty chapel. And despite all the whispers and giggles and cruel comments, something deep inside her refused to give up on the impossible dream of making music. 3 weeks had passed since Maya first discovered the piano, and the whispers around the hospital had grown into something much worse. What started as gentle teasing had turned into open mockery that followed her everywhere she went. It began during the Monday morning staff meeting. Maya was sitting in the back row trying to be invisible as always, when the head nurse, Patricia Kellerman, stood up to make announcements. Patricia was a stern woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she had a way of looking at people that made them feel small. "Before we start," Patricia said, scanning the room with her sharp eyes, "I want to remind everyone that the chapel wing is still under renovation. Staff members should not be using that area for personal activities during work hours." Maya felt every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her. Her face burned red as hot as summer pavement, and she stared down at her hands, wishing she could disappear into the floor. The message was clear, and everyone knew it was meant for her. After the, meeting, the comments came fast and merciless. As Maya walked to the supply room, she heard voices behind her. "Personal activities," someone snorted. "Like banging on an old piano is going to turn her into Mozart." "My 5-year-old nephew plays better than that," another voice added. At least he knows it's just for fun." Maya quickened her pace, but the voices seemed to follow her down the hallway. She ducked into the supply room and closed the door, leaning against it as tears stung her eyes. Through the thin walls, she could still hear the laughter echoing down the corridor. The worst part came later that week when Maya was cleaning the pediatric ward. She was mopping the floor near the nurses' station when she overheard 2 of the younger nurses talking. They didn't notice her there, or maybe they just didn't care. "Did you see the video Rodriguez posted?" one of them said, holding up her phone. "The one of Maya at the piano? Oh my God, yes, I almost died laughing. She looked so serious, like she was performing at Carnegie Hall or something." Maya's blood turned to ice water. "Video? What video?" She tried to keep mopping, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the mop handle. "I shared it in the staff group chat," the nurse continued. "Everyone's been commenting. Johnson said it was the funniest thing he'd seen all week." Maya's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Someone had filmed her at the piano and shared it with the entire hospital staff. All those private moments when she thought she was alone, when she was just trying to figure out how to press the keys without making terrible sounds had been turned into entertainment for everyone she worked with. That night, Maya went home and cried in the bathroom so her children wouldn't see. Her daughter Lucia knocked on the door, asking if she was okay, but Maya couldn't find the words to explain. How could she tell her 15-year-old daughter that grown adults at her workplace were making fun of her for trying to learn something new? The next day was even worse. Maya noticed people pulling out their phones when she walked by, and she was sure they were showing each other the video. The laughter seemed to follow her everywhere. Even the security guard, who had always been friendly, gave her a strange look and shook his head when she passed his desk. During lunch break, Maya hid in the supply closet again, eating her peanut butter sandwich among the cleaning supplies. Through the door, she could hear voices in the hallway. "She's got to be delusional," someone was saying. "I mean, she's what, 35? You can't just decide to become a pianist at that age. Especially when you've never had a lesson in your life." "And those hands," another voice added with a laugh. "Have you seen how rough they are from all that cleaning? Piano requires delicate fingers, not hands that look like sandpaper." Maya looked down at her hands, still holding half of her sandwich. The voices were right. Her hands were rough and cracked from years of scrubbing floors and handling harsh cleaning chemicals. Her fingernails were short and practical, not the long, elegant nails she'd seen on real pianists in movies. But the cruelest blow came from an unexpected source. Maya was taking out the trash when she overheard two doctors talking near the elevator. "It's almost tragic," one of them said. "The woman clearly has some kind of fantasy about making music, but she's completely tone deaf. I heard her trying to play yesterday, and it sounded like a cat walking across the keys. Someone should probably talk to her," the other doctor replied. "It's getting embarrassing. The patients can hear it sometimes, and it's not exactly soothing." Maya stood frozen behind the trash cart, feeling like she'd been slapped. Tone deaf. Embarrassing. The words cut deeper than all the laughter combined. These were educated people, doctors who saved lives and knew about important things. If they said she had no musical ability, it must be true. The situation got even worse when the story reached beyond the hospital walls. Maya's daughter, Lucia, came home from school one day with red eyes and a defeated expression that Maya recognized all too well. "Mom," Lucia said quietly, dropping her backpack by the door. "Some kids at school heard about the piano thing. They were asking me if it's true that you think you're going to be a famous musician." Maya's heart broke a little more. Her own daughter was being teased because of her foolish dreams. "What did you tell them?" Maya asked gently. "I told them." "It wasn't true," Lucia said, not meeting her mother's eyes. "I said you were just cleaning the piano, not trying to play it. I didn't know what else to say." That night, Maya sat at her kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed, staring at her rough, tired hands. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was being ridiculous, chasing after something that was never meant for people like her. She was a cleaning lady, not a musician. She had responsibilities, bills to pay, a family to take care of. What was she doing, wasting time on impossible dreams? But even as these thoughts circled in her mind like vultures, Maya couldn't forget the feeling she got when she touched those piano keys. For just a moment, when that single note rang out clear and true, everything else in her life had seemed possible. The money problems, the exhaustion, the constant worry about her husband's health, all of it had faded away, replaced by something pure and beautiful. Maya looked across the kitchen at the small radio on the counter, the same old radio that had been their only source of music for years. She thought about all the songs she'd heard, all the melodies that had made her heart feel full and light. Someone, somewhere, had learned to create that beauty. Someone had sat at a piano and turned their dreams into music that could make other people feel less alone in the world. Maybe she was too old. Maybe her hands were too rough. Maybe everyone at the hospital was right to laugh at her. But as Maya sat there in the quiet darkness, listening to the sound of her family sleeping peacefully in the next room, she realized something important. The laughter hurt, and the mockery stung. But neither of those things could take away the music she heard in her head when she closed her eyes. The question was whether she was brave enough to keep chasing something that everyone else said was impossible. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the laughter and cruel comments, Maya found herself standing outside the chapel door 3 days later. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her palms were sweaty as she reached for the door handle. She had told herself 100 times to forget about the piano, to focus on her real life and her real responsibilities. But something stronger than fear was pulling her forward. Maya pushed open the door and stepped inside. The chapel was empty and quiet, just like always. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows, and the old piano sat in the corner like a patient friend waiting for her return. She walked over to the piano and sat down on the worn wooden bench. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the keys, and for a moment she just sat there, listening to the silence. Then, very gently, she pressed one key. The note rang out clear and sweet, filling the empty room with sound. Maya closed her eyes and pressed another key, then another. She had no idea what she was doing, but somehow it felt right. Each note seemed to connect with something deep inside her, something that had been sleeping for 34 years and was finally starting to wake up. After that day, Maya began visiting the chapel every chance she got. She discovered that the hospital administration would allow staff members to use the piano during off hours for a small fee to help with maintenance costs. It wasn't much money, just $5 for an hour of practice time, but for Maya it might as well have been a fortune. $5 was lunch money, or bus fare, or part of the electric bill. Maya started skipping lunch to save the money for piano time. She would pack an extra small snack from home and eat it quickly during her regular break, then use her lunch money to pay for an hour with the piano after her shift ended. Her stomach would growl during the afternoon, but the hunger was worth it when she could sit at that piano and try to make sense of the black and white keys. The learning process was harder than Maya had ever imagined. She didn't know anything about music theory or proper hand position or how to read the strange symbols on sheet music. All she had were her ears and her determination, and some nights that didn't feel like nearly enough. Maya discovered that the public library had computers she could use for free, and she started staying after work to watch piano tutorials on the internet. The videos were meant for children with bright colors and simple explanations, but Maya didn't care. She watched the same basic lessons over and over again, taking notes on scrap paper and trying to memorize the finger positions. "This is middle C," the cheerful instructor would say, pointing to a key on the screen. Maya would write it down carefully, drawing little pictures to help her remember. "When you play scales, make sure your thumb goes under your third finger like this." Maya would practice the movements with her hands in the air while riding the bus home, moving her fingers silently and hoping nobody noticed. At red lights, she would tap out simple patterns on her thighs, trying to build the muscle memory that the videos said was so important. The hardest part was getting sheet music. The hospital's old piano came with a few ancient songbooks, but most of the pages were yellow and torn, and the songs were old hymns that Maya didn't recognize. She started printing out simple sheet music from the library's computer, one page at a time, carefully folding each piece of paper and keeping them in an old folder she had found in the supply closet. Learning to read music was like learning a completely new language. The little black dots on the lines meant different notes, and the spacing told you how long to hold each sound. There were strange symbols that meant loud or soft or fast or slow, and it all seemed impossibly complicated at first. Maya would study the sheet music at home by candlelight when the electricity bill got too high. She couldn't afford to waste money on electric lights just to look at music, so she would light a candle and sit at her kitchen table, tracing the notes with her finger and humming the melodies in her head. Her family started to worry about her new obsession. Diego would watch her from his wheelchair as she hunched over the sheet music, and sometimes he would shake his head with concern. "Maya, mija," he would say gently. "Maybe you should get some rest. You're working so hard already." But Maya couldn't rest. Every free moment was precious. Every chance to learn something new about music felt like a gift she couldn't waste. She started carrying folded sheet music in her cleaning cart, studying it during the few quiet moments between tasks. The physical challenges were enormous. Maya's hands, roughened by years of cleaning work, weren't used to the delicate movements that piano required. Her fingers would cramp up after just a few minutes of practice, and sometimes they would crack and bleed from the dry winter air and the constant work. Maya learned to keep small bandages in her pocket, wrapping up the worst cuts so she could keep practicing. She started rubbing cheap hand lotion on her fingers every night, trying to soften the calluses and make her hands more flexible. It was a slow process, and some nights the pain was so bad she could barely move her fingers. But gradually, very gradually, things started to improve. Maya learned to play simple scales without looking at her hands. She figured out how to read basic sheet music, sounding out the notes one by one like a child learning to read words. Her fingers became more nimble, and the cramping happened less often. The breakthrough came one evening about 2 months after she had started practicing seriously. Maya was working on a simple version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star when something magical happened. Instead of thinking about each individual note, her hands seemed to know where to go on their own. The melody flowed out smooth and clear, and for the first time it actually sounded like real music. Maya stopped playing and stared at her hands in amazement. She had just played an actual song, from beginning to end, without making any major mistakes. It was just a simple children's tune, but to Maya it felt like she had climbed Mount Everest. That night, Maya went home with a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was hope, pure and bright and impossible to ignore. For the first time since this whole journey began, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she really could learn to play piano. Maya began staying later and later at the hospital, paying for extra practice time whenever she could scrape together the money. She would practice until 11 o'clock at night, when the security guards would gently remind her that the building was closing. Then she would pack up her sheet music, bandage any new cuts on her fingers, and take the long bus ride home. The other hospital staff still made their jokes and comments, but Maya had learned to block them out. When someone would make piano motions with their fingers or ask about her concert career, Maya would just smile quietly and keep working. She had found something that belonged to her, something that no amount of mockery could take away. Maya's world had become divided into 2 parts: the hours she spent cleaning and working to pay the bills, and the precious evening hours she spent at the piano, slowly but surely building something beautiful with her own 2 hands. One part of her life was about survival, but the other part was about something much more important. It was about becoming the person she had always been meant to be. 6 months had passed since Maya first touched the piano keys in the old chapel. Her life had settled into a rhythm of work, practice, and small victories that nobody else could see. She could now play several simple songs from memory, and her hands had developed the calluses and flexibility that came with hours of daily practice. Maya was mopping the floor near the main nurses' station when she noticed a colorful flyer taped to the bulletin board. Annual St. Mary's Talent Show, it announced in bold letters. Help us raise money for the new Children's Wing playground. All staff members welcome to participate. Maya paused, leaning on her mop handle as she read the details. The talent show was scheduled for the following month, and they were looking for volunteers to sing, dance, tell jokes, or showcase any other talents. At the bottom of the flyer, in smaller print, it mentioned that they were hoping to raise enough money to buy new playground equipment for the young patients. For a moment, Maya allowed herself to imagine walking onto that small stage and sitting down at a piano. She pictured herself playing one of the pieces she had been working on, showing everyone that all their laughter and cruel comments had been wrong. But the fantasy lasted only a few seconds before reality crashed back in. Maya shook her head and continued mopping. She wasn't ready for anything like that. She could play simple songs, yes, but she was still a beginner, and after all the mockery she had endured, the idea of performing in front of the same people who had made fun of her seemed terrifying. But the flyer stayed in her mind throughout the day. During her lunch break, Maya found herself standing in front of the bulletin board again, reading the same words over and over. The talent show was for a good cause. The children's wing was where some of the saddest cases came through, kids fighting cancer or recovering from serious accidents. Maya had cleaned those rooms many times, and she had seen the brave little faces that could use something to smile about. That evening, during her practice time, Maya sat at the piano thinking about the talent show. She had been working on a piece called Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy, a beautiful flowing melody that she had heard on the radio years ago. It was much more difficult than anything she had attempted before, but something about the music spoke to her heart. Maya placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The melody started soft and gentle, like moonlight on water. Her hands moved across the keys with more confidence than she had ever felt before, and the music filled the empty chapel with something that felt almost magical. As she played, Maya made a decision that surprised even her. Tomorrow she would sign up for the talent show. The next morning, Maya's hands were shaking as she approached the sign-up sheet that had been posted next to the original flyer. Several names were already listed: 2 nurses who planned to sing, karaoke, a security guard who did magic tricks, and a group of doctors who were putting together a comedy skit. Maya picked up the pen and hesitated. Once she wrote her name down, there would be no going back. Everyone would know that the cleaning lady thought she was good enough to perform at the hospital talent show. Before she could change her mind, Maya quickly wrote Maya Rodriguez, piano, on the list and walked away as fast as she could. Word spread through the hospital like wildfire. By lunchtime, it seemed like everyone knew that Maya had signed up to play piano at the talent show. The reactions were exactly what she had expected. "Is she serious?" Maya heard one of the lab technicians ask. "I mean, I've heard her practicing, and it's not exactly concert quality." "Someone should probably talk her out of it," another voice replied. "It's going to be embarrassing for everyone." Patricia Kellerman, the head nurse, found Maya during her afternoon rounds. Patricia's expression was serious but not unkind as she approached. "Maya," Patricia said, "I saw that you signed up for the talent show. Are you sure that's a good idea? There will be a lot of people there, including some important donors and board members. We want to make a good impression." Maya felt her cheeks burning, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "I think I can do it, Mrs. Kellerman. I've been practicing for months." Patricia sighed and shook her head. "Maya, I know you've been spending time with that old piano, but this is different. This is performing in front of an audience. These people are expecting professional quality entertainment. Maybe you could help with decorations instead, or volunteer to sell tickets?" The suggestion stung, but Maya had expected it. "I understand your concerns," she said quietly, "but I'd really like to try." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I just don't want to see you get hurt. Sometimes it's better to be realistic about our limitations." After Patricia walked away, Maya stood in the hallway feeling smaller than ever. Maybe the head nurse was right. Maybe she was setting herself up for public humiliation. But when she thought about backing out, something inside her rebelled. She had worked too hard and come too far to give up now. The weeks leading up to the talent show were the most difficult of Maya's life. The pressure of knowing she would have to perform in front of an audience made her practice sessions intense and sometimes frustrating. Her hands would shake when she thought about all the people who would be watching, waiting to see if the cleaning lady could actually play piano. Maya practiced Clair de Lune obsessively, playing it over and over until her fingers knew every note by heart. She worked on her posture, her hand position, and her breathing. She practiced walking onto an imaginary stage and sitting down at the piano bench with confidence she didn't really feel. Some days, Maya was sure she could pull it off. The music would flow beautifully and she would feel like a real pianist. Other days, her fingers would stumble over the keys, and she would make mistakes that seemed to prove everyone right about her limitations. 2 weeks before the talent show, Maya's daughter Lucia found her crying at the kitchen table after a particularly frustrating practice session. "Mom, what's wrong?" Lucia asked, sitting down across from her. Maya wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "It's nothing, mija. Just tired." But Lucia was 15 and not easily fooled. "This is about the piano thing, isn't it?" "Mom, why are you putting yourself through this? Everyone at school is talking about it, and some of the kids are being really mean." Maya's heart broke a little more. She hadn't realized that her decision to perform was affecting her daughter's life at school too. "Maybe I should withdraw," Maya said quietly. Maybe everyone's right and I'm just being foolish. Lucia was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took her mother's rough hands in her own. "Mom," she said, "I've never heard you play, but I've watched you these past few months. You've been happier than I've seen you in years. Even when people were being cruel, even when you were tired and your hands were bandaged up, you kept going. That's not foolish, that's brave." Maya looked up at her daughter in surprise. "I don't know if you're good enough to impress everyone," Lucia continued, "but I know you're good enough to try, and maybe that's all that matters." 3 days before the talent show, Maya sat at the piano in the empty chapel and played Claire de Lune one more time. The music was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once, like everything she had experienced over the past 6 months. When the last note faded away, Maya sat in the silence and made peace with whatever was going to happen. She had given everything she had to this dream. Win or lose, succeed or fail, she would walk onto that stage and show everyone that sometimes the most important thing isn't whether you're perfect. Sometimes the most important thing is just having the courage to try. The night of the talent show arrived faster than Maya had expected. She stood in the small backstage area behind the hospital auditorium, watching through a crack in the curtain as people filed into their seats. The room was filling up quickly, with hospital staff, patients' families, board members, and local donors who had come to support the Children's Wing fundraiser. Maya's hands were trembling so badly, she had to clasp them together to keep them still. She was wearing her best dress, a simple black outfit she had bought years ago for Diego's cousin's wedding. It was the nicest thing she owned, but standing here surrounded by other performers who looked confident and polished, Maya felt like she was playing dress-up. The other acts were warming up around her. The 2 nurses who were singing karaoke were practicing their harmonies, and the security guard was shuffling his deck of cards for his magic show. Everyone seemed relaxed and excited, chatting and laughing like this was just another fun evening. Maya closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She had practiced Claire de Lune hundreds of times over the past month. Her fingers knew every note, every pause, every gentle rise and fall of the melody. But knowing the music and performing it in front of 50 people were 2 completely different things. Through the curtain, Maya could see Patricia Kellerman directing people to their seats. The head nurse caught sight of Maya peeking out and walked over with a concerned expression. "Maya," Patricia said quietly, "there's still time to change your mind. I could announce that you're feeling unwell and no one would think any less of you." Maya appreciated the kindness in Patricia's voice, but she shook her head. "Thank you, but I need to do this." Patricia studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "All right, good luck." The show began with the comedy skit performed by the group of doctors. They had put together a funny routine about hospital life that had the audience laughing and clapping. Maya watched from the wings, trying to absorb some of their confidence through her skin. Next came the security guard with his magic tricks, followed by the 2 nurses singing a beautiful duet of "Stand By Me." Each act was well received, with warm applause and even a few standing ovations. Maya could hear people in the audience talking and laughing between acts, and the atmosphere was friendly and supportive. But she also noticed some of her co-workers scanning the program and whispering when they saw her name listed. A few people pointed toward the backstage area, and Maya caught fragments of conversation that made her stomach churn. "I can't believe she's actually going through with this. Should be interesting. I hope she doesn't embarrass herself too badly." Maya tried to block out the voices and focus on her breathing. She ran through the opening notes of Claire de Lune in her mind, feeling her fingers move in the air as she mentally played the piece. Finally, it was her turn. The announcer, one of the senior doctors, stepped up to the microphone with a smile that looked slightly forced. "Our next performer is Maya Rodriguez, from our housekeeping staff," he said. "Maya will be playing piano for us this evening." There was polite applause, but Maya could hear the uncertainty in it. She walked onto the small stage on legs that felt like they were made of jelly, and the audience seemed to blur into a sea of faces. Some people were smiling encouragingly, but others looked skeptical or even slightly amused. Maya sat down at the piano bench and adjusted her position. The piano was the same old instrument from the chapel, which had been moved into the auditorium. For the show, Seeing it there under the bright stage lights felt like greeting an old friend in a strange place. The audience settled into silence, waiting to see what the cleaning lady thought she could do with those ivory keys. Maya placed her hands on the piano and felt a moment of pure terror. What if she forgot the music? What if her hands cramped up? What if she proved everyone right about being foolish and unrealistic? Then Maya remembered something her daughter had said. Maybe that's all that matters, having the courage to try. Maya took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of Clair de Lune floated out into the quiet auditorium, soft and delicate as moonbeams. Maya's hands moved across the keys with a grace that surprised even her, and the melody began to weave its magic through the room. The piece started gently, almost like a whisper, and Maya could feel the audience leaning forward slightly, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of what they were hearing. Her fingers found each note with precision and feeling, and the music seemed to take on a life of its own. As the melody built and developed, Maya forgot about everything else. She forgot about the audience, the criticism, the months of mockery, and doubt. There was only the music flowing through her hands and filling the space around her with something pure and transcendent. The middle section of Clair de Lune is more complex, with cascading runs and delicate ornaments that require real skill to execute properly. Maya's hands danced across the keys, bringing out every nuance of Debussy's masterpiece. The music painted pictures in the air, moonlight on water, gentle breezes, the peaceful beauty of a quiet night. Maya could sense that something had shifted in the audience. The skeptical whispers had stopped completely, replaced by an attentive silence that felt almost sacred. She glanced up briefly and saw faces transformed by wonder and surprise. Patricia Kellerman was sitting in the front row with her mouth slightly open and tears were beginning to form in her eyes. The final section of the piece was Maya's favorite part, where the melody returns with even greater beauty and depth. Her hands moved with confidence now, bringing out every emotion that the music contained. Years of struggle, months of practice, and a lifetime of dreams poured through her fingers and into the keys. As Maya played the last few measures, she felt a profound sense of completion. Not because the piece was ending, but because she had finally become the person she was meant to be. The woman who had spent 34 years believing she wasn't good enough for beautiful things had just created something magnificent. The final note hung in the air for what seemed like forever, and the auditorium was completely silent. Maya lifted her hands from the keys and looked out at the audience, unsure of what to expect. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Patricia Kellerman stood up, tears streaming down her face, and began to clap. The applause started slowly but quickly built into something thunderous. One by one, the entire audience rose to their feet, and the sound of their ovation filled the room like a wave of joy and amazement. Maya sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. These were the same people who had laughed at her, who had said she was too old and too rough around the edges to make music. But tonight, they were on their feet, celebrating what she had accomplished. Through the crowd, Maya spotted her daughter Lucia standing in the doorway at the back of the auditorium. Lucia had refused to come to the show, too embarrassed by all the attention her mother's piano playing had attracted. But here she was, with tears in her eyes and the biggest smile Maya had ever seen. As the applause continued, Maya stood up from the piano bench and looked out at all the faces in the audience. She saw colleagues who had mocked her, supervisors who had doubted her, and strangers who had come expecting to be entertained by amateur hour performances. But she also saw something else in their faces: respect, admiration, and a kind of awe that comes when someone exceeds every possible expectation. Maya had not just played a beautiful piece of music. She had reminded everyone in that room that human potential is limitless, that dreams don't have expiration dates, and that sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most unexpected places. Maya smiled and gave a small bow, then walked off the stage with her head held high. She had proven to herself and to everyone else that with enough determination, enough practice, and enough heart, a cleaning lady with rough hands and impossible dreams could create something truly magnificent. The Applause followed her all the way into the wings, and Maya knew that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. She had touched those piano keys 6 months ago as someone who believed she wasn't worthy of beautiful things. Tonight, she was walking off that stage as someone who had just created beauty that moved people to tears. Maya Rodriguez had found her voice, and it was more powerful than anyone had ever imagined possible.